There is 1 month until Arkansas schools reopen, and the plan still is to have every school start with students physically present. The governor remains firm on that decision, even with open criticism. 5 News reporter Nick Camper tells us who would make the decision to close a school in the event of a COVID-19 outbreak.
We really are fundamentally making decisions based upon what the situation is in that particular local area.
This week, the Arkansas chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics opposed a statewide reopening. They stated that with some counties having higher positivity rates than others, each school's reopen plan should be different. The governor says they are beginning to collect more data that can help with the decision making.
We can look at the level of spread in that school district, in that city, or in that county, and make decisions based upon that.
The Department of Education released more information detailing plans for schools, including closures. The Arkansas Department of Health released this statement about closures, saying ADH would not prohibit a school from closing if determined by a local district and/or ADE that it was needed. But in consultation with ADE, our department may request a school or campus to close due to level of disease transmission. The governor says the current plan takes into account what is happening at the local levels with COVID-19.
That concept is built into the framework that we have issued in terms of statewide guidelines.
That was 5 News reporter Nick Camper. The governor says he plans to speak further with state leaders about their recommendations because the pandemic is constantly changing.